Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how to make my gluten-free peach and rhubarb cobbler. You don't have to put rhubarb in it. You don't even have to put peaches in it. You can make this recipe with any fruit that you like. It doesn't have to be peach and rhubarb. It could be all peach, apricot, berry cobbler, apple cobbler, whatever you want. I had some extra rhubarb that had come up. I decided to pick. And I also was cleaning out my freezer. This time of year, I start to go through a lot of things that were left in my freezer that I didn't use over the winter and make room for more things. So I had about an 8-cup bag of frozen peaches from last fall. And then I had some extra rhubarb here that I thought would go really nicely in a peach cobbler. It's a really versatile recipe that you can adjust the flour and the sugar depending on what fruit you're putting in. There's also a lot more liquid in them because they've been frozen. Even though I do have them draining here and they are thawed, but I try to get out as much of that extra liquid as possible, especially using rhubarb that tends to be really liquidy once it's cooked as well. So for this recipe, for the filling, I have adjusted the flour to be a little bit more to account for that extra liquid. If you were doing something like blueberries, you might not need as much flour. I'm using a combination of coconut sugar and date sugar today. You could use white sugar, brown sugar, whatever you want, honey, maple syrup, whatever your preference is. And again, adjust that amount according to what fruit you're using. If you have something like rhubarb that is kind of tart, I am using a little bit more sweetener than I would normally. But the peaches were really sweet last year, so I think I will have a good combination here. And then I've got the ingredients ready for the topping, which is kind of a biscuit topping that is the cobbler topping. There's a lot of confusion over the difference between a cobbler, a crisp, a Betty, that are all very similar. They usually are a fruit bottom, and then you put on some kind of topping. A cobbler is more of a biscuit, kind of cake if you want to, or shortcake type of topping. A crisp is usually done with oats and maybe some nuts. And then a Betty is usually breadcrumbs. If you're interested in seeing either of those, I would love to show you those. I have a lot of recipes for both of those as well. So I'm just cutting up my rhubarb into about bite-sized pieces. My peaches were already cut up when I put them in the freezer. And I'm just kind of eyeballing the amount of rhubarb. I figure I'm kind of aiming for 4 cups. If it's a little bit less or a little bit more, that's just fine. And then I have a buttered casserole dish, and I'm preheating my oven to 350. I don't even know if rhubarb and peaches go together very well, but we're gonna find out today. I don't see why they wouldn't, but you never know. Usually when I make cobblers or desserts like this, besides pies, I always try to use fruits that are in season. They usually have better flavor, things like that. But this type of dessert is also really versatile to use something that might already be on your shelf. I know a lot of people will can pie filling, cherry pie filling, apple pie filling, things like that, and have those on their shelves for later use. You could totally use a filling like that. And you would just dump in your filling and then make your topping. It's such an easy recipe to do that with. And while I'm finishing cutting up this rhubarb, I just want to say thank you guys for being here and watching my videos. If you're enjoying this video, go ahead and push the like button. Even if you don't like rhubarb, you could still put any kind of fruit in this cobbler. Maybe you don't like peaches. And that is exactly the 4 cups that I was aiming for. So now that I've got that cut up, I'm going to juice my 2 lemons. Again, this is kind of a rough estimate. I love recipes like this where you have the basic fruit on the bottom and then the kind of biscuit topping. I usually do the same amount for the biscuit topping. That's kind of a standard recipe. But the filling, it will change every time. And so for this, I'm aiming for a 1/4 cup of lemon juice, give or take, or 2 lemons. That's my exact measurement for you right there. If you wanted to, you could put orange juice in here instead of the lemon juice. This is also something that would be really good with fresh strawberries. If you have a lot of fresh strawberries, you could make a strawberry rhubarb cobbler instead of a strawberry rhubarb pie. That would be really good. Blueberries, whatever. Peaches and blueberries go really well together. So now that I've got my lemon juiced, I am going to move this aside. We're not quite ready for the lemon juice yet. And I always make my filling first, because if it ends up having a lot of extra liquid, I can always adjust and add a little bit more flour if I need to before I bake it. Although with the flour in there, it will thicken up when it's baking, but it's just something that I do. So I've got about 3/4 of a cup of coconut sugar. I've got a 1/2 cup of date sugar. I've got 3/4 of a cup of flour, my gluten-free flour. I've got 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. This is also something that you can leave out if you don't like cinnamon. Put in less, put in more, put in your favorite spices, whatever you like to do. And then I'm just going to mix this together. It doesn't even have to be, but I find that if I get the flour mixed in with the sugar first, and sometimes date sugar can be a little bit lumpy. So if you break up a little bit of those lumps, mix all of this together, it just seems a little bit easier when I add in the fruit. My oven is ready. So now I'm going to dump in my rhubarb and my peaches. I'm actually going to mix this around a little bit first before I add in the peaches. And now for my frozen thawed peaches. That was 8 cups. It squishes down so much. And now that I've got those in there, I'm going to add in 1 teaspoon of vanilla and then my lemon juice. And I'm just straining it in case there's any seeds in there. And then I've got 4 tablespoons of butter that I've cut up. So just give this a really good stir. Make sure to get everything mixed in. All of that sugar is on the bottom. I'm going to let this sit in the bowl for just a few minutes. I want to see how much liquid comes out before I put it in my buttered casserole dish. And this is the kind of recipe that I kind of eyeball how big of a casserole dish I think I will need. I don't even remember how big that one is, but that one seems to fit most things really well. And in this case, just looking at this now, I think it will fill it up almost to the top. But we'll see, maybe only 3/4 of the way. And then I do have a foil-lined cookie sheet here that I will be putting that casserole dish on. If you've ever made a fruit pie or a cobbler and your fruit bubbles up over the side, it will make the biggest mess in your oven. And then you might choose to just move instead of cleaning your oven. Sticky baked on fruit is the worst thing ever. I once had a car that I had a peach pie in the back seat and it kind of tilted and it was hot out of the oven and I was taking it to my grandma's house and I didn't realize, because it was in the back seat, that those peach juices were dripping all over the upholstery. I never did get it out. And then I sold the car. So I don't know, maybe somebody wondered, maybe if you've ever seen a, an orangish brown spot in the car of someone, maybe that's what it's from. So I've got 2.5 cups of my gluten-free flour in this bowl. And then I have 3 teaspoons of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I have 1 tablespoon of honey, 1 egg, and a 3/4 cup of milk. And then I've got 1 stick of butter, 8 tablespoons, 1/2 cup. But before I get the flour part mixing, I am going to mix my egg and my honey in with my milk. I find it's easier to have all of the liquid in one spot, and then once I get the dry ingredients mixed together, I just have to pour and mix once. So honey goes in, and I've got everything at room temperature. My butter is not super soft, and I've mentioned this a lot before, but it is soft enough that I'll be able to use my pastry blender, but not a brick solid from the fridge. And this topping is so easily made in a food processor if that's what you wanted to do. Ooh. Egg goes in, and I'll just give this a really good mix. Get this egg and this honey all mixed together in this milk. This is also the perfect dessert for a Dutch oven. If you're camping, or even just having a cookout where you're cooking things in Dutch ovens in a fire pit or something like that, cobblers are such a perfect dessert for Dutch oven cooking. So that's pretty good. And now I'm just going to mix in my baking powder and my salt in with my flour. It doesn't even have to be mixed in, but we'll do it anyways. And if you don't have a pastry blender or a food processor, you could just rub this mixture between your fingers. Whatever works best for you. So all in there. I didn't have a knife ready. And then just start cutting in your butter. It's very similar to a pie crust, very similar to a biscuit. And of course, if you wanted a sweeter cobbler topping, you could add more than just a tablespoon of honey or sugar or whatever you're adding in. And then I use my knife, just stir this mixture around, see what's happening on the bottom. Use my spoon. And this looks really good to me. There's some pretty small pieces, some kind of biggish pieces of butter. It really doesn't matter. Unless you have a really big piece of butter. You can cut that apart a little bit with your spoon. But other than that, it looks really good. Such an easy, forgiving dough to work with. Again, as with anything gluten-free, we don't have to worry about over-mixing and developing any gluten. And so now that I've got this most of the way ready, get some things out of the way here. And before I added my wet ingredients, I want to bring back my filling and see how much liquid is coming out. And I should also say, I'm checking to see how much liquid is being absorbed by the amount of flour and sugar that I added in. And it's actually really nice and thick. So I'm not going to add in any extra flour. It's looking really good. And now I can put it in my casserole dish. Kind of made a mess here with my flour. Let me clean this up a little bit. Get that into the bowl. Bring over my casserole dish. I want to say that this is about a 3-quart. Maybe a 4-quart. It doesn't say on the bottom. But it looks like it will fit pretty good. And I know I'm going back and forth, but I don't want my dough to sit and get super soggy while I'm getting my filling ready. So I'm just gonna go all in one. And I think this is actually gonna be perfect. I'm just flattening it out just a little bit, pushing it into the corners, even though a oval dish doesn't have corners. If this were all the way domed at the top, I would take some of it out and put in a separate dish. But because it's not all the way to the top, I'm not too worried about it. Fruit things like this do puff up in the oven, and especially with the topping, and then they sink back down. Fruit desserts always shrink when they're done cooking. Hopefully I won't regret my decision to keep it all in this pan. We'll see. So move that aside, bring back our cobbler topping. And nothing fancy, I'm just going to use this spoon to stir in my milk, egg, and honey. And that honey is all dissolved in there. There's nothing stuck on the bottom. Actually, I might use this fork instead of the spoon. And then I'll just stir and pour at the same time. Ooh. Try to get it all in the bowl. And you don't really need to beat this. I'm mostly just making sure that all of that flour is getting absorbed. You don't want really big dry pockets, but you don't need this to be one smooth mixture. We want it to be a little bit crumbly like this. And once you can see that there's no dry bits of flour and butter on the bottom, you're good to go. Let me clean up my mess. So bring back our peaches and rhubarb filling, and I'm just going to dollop this biscuit crust mixture all over the top. I don't even care if it's all touching. I have enough that it will be touching, but I just kind of do little dollops and then flatten them out just a little bit. You don't want a big mound of this topping and then it won't cook all the way through. But I also like to leave cracks in between here so the juices can bubble up. I'm going all the way to the edges. As you can see, I'm not really packing it down. This is a really full pan. I might be sorry, but glad that I have a cookie sheet with foil on it. But once you're at this point, there's no going back and taking any filling out. So we're just gonna go with it. Such a fast, easy dessert. In fact, you could make this if you have guests at your table. You could make this while you're all visiting. It really comes together so fast. Okay, that looks really good. I'm gonna put it on my cookie sheet. I'm going to check it at 30 minutes. It might go 45 minutes. If you're concerned that your biscuit topping is cooking faster than your fruit in the bottom, just cover it with foil. But we'll see. I'm guessing between 30 and 45 minutes is usually about what a peach cobbler takes, but I do have the rhubarb in there, so we'll see. Left the oven door open. I'm just feeling my crust cobbler topping to see how done it is. Parts of it don't feel as done as I'd like it to be. Even though it's getting golden brown on this side, I did turn it around in the oven, but I think it needs a little more color back here. And I don't know if you can see, but parts of the juices are bubbling out. That's what we want to see. But I think we'll go back in the oven for maybe 10 more minutes. I don't want this to burn, but I do want a little bit of this to get a little bit more done on top. Okay, 10 more minutes went by. This is exactly what I want it to look like. You don't have to let it go to get this dark brown, but I like it where it's a little bit crunchy. I was expecting more juices to bubble up in between my crust topping here, although parts of it started to. But that's all right. It is bubbling up around the edges and of course down the side. Good thing I put it on a foil lined cookie sheet. And it's already sinking down. And judging by how the flow of the juices are coming out, I don't think my filling will be too runny at all. If you had done this in something like a 9x13 pan, you would probably have, of course, a thinner fruit layer, but also your crust probably wouldn't have covered the top of it as much as this did. But it looks good to me. Use whatever casserole dish you have. So I'm going to move this aside to cool off. The other good thing about this kind of dessert is you can really serve this warm. I wouldn't serve it right this minute. It is pretty hot. But you could serve it warm, room temperature, cold. It really doesn't matter. I like to serve it a little bit warm with a scoop of ice cream. I don't have any ice cream, so today I'm using heavy cream. So while that is cooling off, I'm going to whip some heavy cream. This is about, well, 1 cup or so. A splash of vanilla and a little bit of honey. That cream went everywhere. And I like my heavy cream pretty floppy. Let's bring this a little bit closer. That really went everywhere. That's what happens when you have a lot of stuff in your kitchen. It gets covered in food. Sure smells good. We'll just use a big spoon here and just dig in. Very carefully. And of course, it doesn't look very pretty. But you know, desserts like this, they're not supposed to look super pretty. They're not supposed to hold a slice. Of course, it will hold a slice tomorrow. But right now, it looks like this. Little bit of our whipped cream. I'll just use this spoon. If you had been a little bit more patient than me and let this cool off, your whipped cream wouldn't be melting so much. But I don't mind. So let's give it a bite. I'm sure it's hot. That is really good. And I have a really good ratio of peach and rhubarb. And my cobbler topping here, it is really good. It's the texture of a biscuit, a little bit crunchy on top, just the way I like it. So good. Make sure if you're serving this super warm like mine is, and you're putting ice cream or even whipped cream, it is just melting. So make sure you don't have a super flat plate that it will all just drip off the sides. I just keep eating it. And even though the rhubarb is in here, I'm not getting a lot of rhubarb flavor. The peach is really coming through. And just that little bit of cinnamon is coming through. But it's really a good combination. And I know I've mentioned before, but using sugar alternatives, for example, like today, the coconut sugar and date sugar, they add just enough sweetness, but you can still taste everything else. That's one of the things I have so enjoyed about going sugar-free. Instead of things being just really super sweet, using sugar alternatives, you really get the flavor of everything that's in here. It really makes such a difference to me. But so good. So good. What a perfect combination of peaches and rhubarb. And it looks even worse now that all of my whipped cream has melted into it. But I don't care. It's so delicious. I just keep eating it. What a great dessert. Or breakfast. Something like this for breakfast, I think is a really good breakfast. Most of it is actually fruit. But you would eat a biscuit for breakfast. Why not this? Let me know what you think if you make this recipe. Let me know if you make a different kind of cobbler. What fruit you use. and perfect for any time of year when fruit is fresh in season, or like today where I'm using up other fruit that has been in my freezer all winter. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.